Greetings and salutations, young true believers. Time for Induction Fallacies, round 2. All right. Mistaken appeal to authority, or fallacious appeal to authority. Speaker writer commits this fallacy when he or she tries to support a contention by offering as evidence the opinion of a non-authoritative source. Here's an example. My father thinks President Trump lied, therefore the president lied. Your father may not be, and probably isn't, a political scientist or a historian or, a trained, behavioral analyst, something like that, right? Here's another example of mistaken appeal to authority. My doctor thinks my car has leaking engine valves, therefore my car has leaking engine valves. Your doctor, assuming your doctor is a cardiologist, he or she may be able to tell you if your heart has leaking valves, but not necessarily that your car has leaking valves. Mistaken appeal to popularity, or sometimes known as mistaken appeal to common belief. This occurs when a speaker or writer treats an issue that cannot be settled by public opinion as if it can so be settled, right? The Iranians have nuclear weapons, everyone knows that. Now, gang, you will notice, right? The second part of that claim, the Iranians have nuclear weapons, everyone knows that, is a proof surrogate. There's a lot going on here, a lot of mistaken reasoning. Almost everyone knows that plastic is contaminating the oceans, therefore plastic is contaminating the oceans. Whether or not plastic is contaminating the oceans cannot be settled by popular sentiment. It can, however, be settled by testing, right? All right. Mistaken appeal to common practice. You're going to go home for Thanksgiving. Your parents are going to be making turkey and, stuffing, the usual, right? And you're going to ask, well, why do we have to have turkey and stuffing and blah, blah, blah every single Thanksgiving? And they're going to say, because it's always been that way. That's the mistaken appeal to common practice. It occurs when a speaker or writer tries to justify a practice on the grounds that it is traditional or commonly practiced. Even if it is commonly practiced, that doesn't mean you have to do it, right? The bandwagon fallacy. Sometimes a speaker or writer will try to do something to get, or will say or do something to try to get us to do something by suggesting that everyone, or most everyone, is doing it. The idea is not to cite what people believe as evidence of the truth of the claim. Rather, the attempt is to psychologically induce us, right, to do something by making us feel out of step with things if we don't, right? This is the bandwagon fallacy. Here's an example. I am the most popular candidate by far. Only a minority support my opponent. Even if that was the case, that doesn't mean you have to support the majority candidate, right? Let's get a spa. They're very popular these days. Well, okay, great. That doesn't mean you have to buy one, right? Fallacies related to cause and effect. The most famous of these is the post hoc ergo propter hoc fallacy, Latin after this because of this. A speaker or writer commits this fallacy when he or she assumes that the fact that one event came after another establishes that it was caused by the former, right? Here's an example. After I took Zicam, my cold went away fast. Therefore, taking Zicam caused my cold to go away fast. It might have, but it's not proof. So, gang, here's the thing. If you think there are grounds for suspecting causation, right, then the next thing you have to do is test, right? It's not enough to see or assume there's a connection and then draw the conclusion, okay, they're necessarily connected. You got to do the test, right? That's what the post hoc fallacy is. You think there's a causal connection, but you don't do the legwork to prove that there's a causal connection, right? Here's a slightly different example of post hoc. Every day the sun comes up right after the rooster crows. Therefore, the rooster crowing causes the sun to come up. We can't see any way that a rooster crowing is causally related to the sun coming up. All right. Overlooking the possibility of coincidence. This is a special variety of the post hoc fallacy. Here's an example. After Susan threw out the chain letter, she was in an automobile accident. Therefore, throwing out the chain letter caused her to get in an automobile accident. Now, if you're not familiar with chain letters, it's a lot like when your uncle or aunt on Facebook forward something to you and tell you if you don't forward it or post it to your site, right? Forward it to 5 friends, you're gonna have 7 years bad luck. It's the same concept, right? The speaker has overlooked the possibility that the sequential events were coincidental. Overlooking a possible common cause. Here's the example. I left the lights on when I went to bed. Next morning I woke up with a headache. Therefore, leaving the lights on caused a headache, right? The speaker here has overlooked the possibility that leaving the lights on and waking up with a headache may each be the effects of a common cause, namely intoxication, right? Overlooking the possibility of random variation. Now this one's complicated, right? A variable, by definition, is something that varies, right? So in this instance, right, this fallacy occurs when we overlook that fact, or we ignore the fact that variables are going to vary. So for example, the time it takes you to find a parking place each morning is subject to random variation. If you jog the same route daily, the time it takes you to do it will vary randomly from day to day. Not greatly, but it will still vary, right? If you play basketball, your field goal percentage from game to game is subject to random variation, right? If you play golf, how far you can drive the golf ball each time you hit it will vary randomly, right? So if you seize on one of these variations and look for its cause, you won't find one, right? Again, variables are so called because they vary, right? And they vary randomly, right? So don't assume that variation to be due to causation. Overlooking the possibility of regression. This mistake is committed when we overlook this fact. If the average value of a variable is atypical, that is to say non-representative on one measurement, it is likely to be less atypical on a subsequent measurement. This sounds complicated, but it isn't. If the average distance the randomly selected group of men can drive a golf ball is relatively distant from the true average for all men, let's say the true average for all men is, 100 yards. I've never played golf, all right? Then on a second measurement, the average is apt to be closer to the true average. This phenomenon is known as regression to the statistical mean, right? So if somebody is doing exceptionally good in athletic performance, rest assured, sooner or later, they're going to come back to normal, right? Here's the example from the text. We measured the IQs, of a group of students and found the average to be relatively low. Then we had them take a course in critical thinking, after which we measured their IQs again. Their IQs were higher. Therefore, the course in critical thinking raised their IQs. As you now know, the average IQs were apt to be higher on the second measurement, closer to the true average. Anyway, the speaker has overlooked that fact and attributed the change in the IQ scores to the critical thinking course, which is fallacious. All right. Cum hoc, ergo propter hoc. Again, Latin, with this, because of this, right? John had a heart attack while he was saying a prayer. Therefore, the prayer caused a heart attack. So cum hoc, again, this is a little bit different than post hoc. This fallacy occurs when a speaker writer assumes that the fact that two events happen at the same time establishes causation, right? Gang, I want you to always bear this in mind. Correlation does not equal causation. Correlation does not equal causation. All right. Overlooking the possibility of reversed causation, right? Here's an example. Successful business people often drive expensive cars. Therefore, driving an expensive car will help make you a successful business person. That's getting the causation backwards. The reason a person is driving the expensive car is because they are a successful business person, right? All right. Now, slippery slope, very common fallacy, right? Slippery slope fallacy is an argument that rests on an unsupported warning that is controversial and tendentious. That is to say, not well supported. So again, slippery slope fallacy is an argument that rests on an unsupported warning that is controversial and tendentious to the effect that something will progress by degrees to an undesirable outcome, right? So you might remember there's a DirecTV ad campaign from a couple years ago. When your cable goes out, you get bored. When you get bored, you take up new hobbies. When you take up new hobbies, you go hang gliding. When you go hang gliding, you crash into power lines. When you crash into power line, power grid goes down. Power grid goes down. Anarchy ensues. Anarchy ensues. Your elderly father gets punched in the gut for a can of soup. That's slippery slope reasoning. Now, here's an example from the text. Raising the Pentagon's budget by 5% this year will just lead to a continuous 5% increase. In 20 years, the entire U.S. government budget will go to the military. That's slippery slope reasoning, right? All right, untestable explanation. That's the last one from this chapter. This fallacy occurs when someone offers an explanation that could not be tested even in principle, right? Here's an example. He has heart issues because of sins he committed in a previous life. There's no way to empirically verify that. There's no way to test it, right? Another example. The crime rate has gone up because of general moral decay. Well, there's no way to gauge general moral decay, so that statement is essentially meaningless. And again, that's the untestable explanation fallacy. All right, gang. Next week, formal fallacies of language.